Okay. Question 8. Hereditary hypophosphatemic rickets, HHR, is a human disorder related to low levels of phosphate in the blood. Probably going to be unnecessary. HHR follows an X-linked dominant mode of inheritance. A male with HHR has 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls, but the mother of the children does not have HHR. So the mother doesn't, which is unaffected. So then we want to draw a pedigree. And we want to shade all individuals who will have HHR. The best way to do this is just to perform the cross, just to be safe. And so that's exactly what I've done here. We know that the male has the particular disorder, or has inherited that human disorder. So therefore will be dominant at the H particular chromosome. And so that's here represented by H, X, big H, Y, and then obviously the female, or the mother, is unaffected. Therefore, X, little h, X, little h. We perform the cross, and then what we find is that all females, which is highlighted in yellow, will have the trait, or will actually express that particular phenotype, whereas all the males shouldn't. And so what we'd actually therefore go in our pedigree is we know that this is the parent generation, which is shown by the male, who's obviously has the trait, therefore is shaded, the female which doesn't. And in our last one, in our next generation, which is obviously going to be F1, we have 6 children. And of those 6 children, that means 3 of the boys, all boys, will not have that particular disorder. They will not express it. Therefore, they will all be unshaded. And the females, who will all have it, will therefore be shaded. So moving into the next part of the question, part B. In another family, a different trait, so obviously note that it's not looking at the last question, occurs in some individuals as shown in the pedigree below. And so this is the pedigree, and we're looking at part B, which says determine the mode of inheritance and give 2 reasons to support your response. So I'll give you all of them, and obviously you've looked at the assessor's report already, and you've already done the question. But when we look at this, the mode of inheritance is actually autosomal recessive, and I want to break this down into 2 sections and reasons. The first part is that it is actually recessive, and my question is, the question you're probably asking is why? We look at these particular 2 individuals, which are the parents from generation 2, so II5 and II6. So, if it was dominant, if the mode, of inheritance was dominant, then we would actually be able to assign these 2, for example, let's just say little a, looking at the highlighter, that's great, looking at little a, and little a, little a. If that was the case, then none of their offspring should actually show or express that phenotype. They should not have it, but there's one person that does. And the only way they could do so is if these 2 were actually heterozygous and it was a dominant mode of inheritance. So if you look at this particular monohybrid cross that I've just done, we know these are 2 heterozygous individuals, who obviously don't have the trait. But then when we actually perform this cross, we know 50% here wouldn't express the trait, but 50% would. And that is the reason why this individual, which is III number 1 of the offspring, that actually expresses it. And so that's my rationale for it. I say it's recessive because parents II5 and II6 are unaffected, but they have an affected child, which means it must be recessive. When we go into reason number 2, we look at if it's autosomal or if it's sex-linked. And this comes down to this first particular cross, which we do with the parents from generation 1. Now, as you can see, we already know that it's recessive, So therefore, when we look at this, if this particular mother we know has the disorder or the trait, we know that there will be X little a, X little a. And then we look at the father and we know it's unaffected, therefore must be X big A, Y. And when you perform this cross, what we see is that all the females should actually not express the trait, but they do. And so what that shows us is that when we actually look at it, that it can't be X-linked or sex-linked, and therefore it must be autosomal, and that's because mother I2 doesn't pass on all the traits to her son. When we also look at this part here, we know that all the sons should actually have it, whereas this particular one and this one don't have it, therefore it must be autosomal. I know it's a pretty thorough explanation for it, but just the way in which you break down these pedigrees, look at what is consistent with what you know in terms of the crosses that you can make, and that will help you arrive at the correct answer. Okay, part C. Consider the identical twins. What do we know about identical twins? That they are genetically identical. Okay, and this is obviously if we could go into depth, that's moving into university in terms of the types of identical twins you can have. But we'll just say they're identical, therefore they're genetically identical, and therefore these are individuals III and III4. Neither individual has the different trait. A study of many other traits expressed by these two individuals when they were aged 20 was carried out. What would the findings of such a study reveal? So remember, the idea of expressing a particular trait is dependent on two things: the genes and your environment. And so what we find with these identical twins is that the study should reveal that the trait should be the same, as they are genetically identical. However, there would also be differences due to the environmental influences and the interaction that these individuals would have with their environment. And that's what we know is the case in terms of the expression of a certain trait. Yes, it's part of if you inherit that trait, but it's also to do with the environment that you reside in. And so therefore, my 2 dot points here is that the study would reveal that the traits are the same as they are genetically identical. However, there would also be differences due to those environmental influences, and that would get you 2 marks. When we look at the statistics for this particular question, only 13% got 2 out of 2, which means it's these worded questions, these other contextual questions that actually are proving difficult. But again, just think logically. What do we know about identical twins? We know that they are genetically identical. What do we know in terms of the expression of a phenotype or a trait? We know it's due to 2 things: your genes and the environment. And that's the big thing that actually looks at this question.